As you can see, we have a full agenda today. And we're going to get right to it with Jake Necessary, our security architect, who's going to just kind of frame up the whole security updates that were discussed and the themes that were at Ignite this fall. So, Jake, please take it away.
Okay, great. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is really the core theme of Ignite and security. So Microsoft's focus was really securing end to end. This slide is just giving you an idea of the number of sessions that were on security. There's roughly 143. And of that, they were kind of broken off into these topics. You can kind of see that threat protection, cloud security, and identity are kind of dominating the discussion. And zero trust, although still a theme and very important, the discussion has kind of shifted a little bit, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. Can we move on, Ken? Thank you. So the whole idea is presenting that they presented Ignite is to protect everything. And kind of the lens that they evaluated security through included security, compliance, identity management, and privacy. Zero trust is a foundation. However, Microsoft has begun to stress the word resilient and resiliency. And so the whole idea, the theme was kind of beating through most of these sessions was how do we become more resilient? One thing that, or a couple things that were announced also from a product perspective that I thought were interesting to highlight here. For smaller organizations, less than 300 users, Defender for Business is either greatly reduced in cost if you're on the basic plan, or if you're on the premium plan, it's actually included. So Defender for Business is going to be a great addition for the small businesses that still need to have that kind of focus. And I think everyone's kind of heard that there's now bidirectional support between Sentinel and Defender. So you can basically use both those tools interchangeably to close alerts. We move on to the next slide. Okay. So when we talk about securing the hybrid workforce, which is obviously a theme through COVID and maybe to stay, it's important to understand that protect everything initiative. Questions we need to ask ourselves is, who we are, what do we need to do, how much do we trust? Those are the things that we need to focus on. And identity has been defined now as the trust fabric. I know that when we talk about zero trust, we often say it's an identity-based security mindset. However, identities now is kind of filling the role of a trust fabric. And so Microsoft believes that identity is extremely important in the new security models. And as a result, they have taken some steps. For example, the adoption of CloudKnox as an organization, which we'll talk a little more detail shortly, and also privacy, DLP, and other actions are being added for, say, Macs and Linux desktops. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this slide is about CloudKnox in general. So one of the things that we found in the past is when we talk about access control and specifically privileged access control, organizations are really challenged in the realm of assessing, preventing, enforcement, and governance. So this is exactly what CloudKnox solves. By acquiring this organization, there's now technology that allows customers to really look through the assessment, prevention, enforcement, and governance lens, and that allows the protection of access control through infrastructure, platform as a service, software as a service, those types of things, and also extend out to on-prem. And this announcement also allows organizations to provision users on site, and things like custom workflow are added. So CloudKnox is an outstanding add to the story. And I wanted to take just a second and really talk about cyber resiliency. I know that in the past couple of weeks we've seen vulnerabilities that have really impacted our organizations. And then also I know that there's been 2 massive AWS outages as well. So this is exactly what cyber resiliency is about. It's how do you bounce back? How are you proactively protecting your environment? So that's what resiliency is the ability to bounce back. And some things that Microsoft has done is enhancement of Azure AD. The resiliency of Azure AD has been greatly enhanced by creating a cell type of architecture that reduces kind of the blast radius, and also the introduction of an independent backup authentication service that also respects conditional access policies. So Azure AD is highly redundant now. There's not a single point of failure. There are multiple levels. It is elastic and it's safe to deploy and provide modern verification. And I think by adding this cell-based architecture and also the backup service allows for this to happen. And identity has been identified as the new cybersecurity battleground. So I think what we're going to see is more enhancements in resiliency across the Microsoft platforms, and that will enable us to be able to bounce back if there were an attack or activity that happens in your environment. And I think that's all the slides I had for security. Just to recap a little bit, there were so many sessions on security. It would be great to go back and target some of those and re-listen to them. But I think we're seeing great positive traction in the security realm.
Thanks so much, Jake. And again, identity, the new cybersecurity battleground, that's key as we move forward, right? And so let's move right into M365 security with Matt Nevins, who is a cloud strategist with our GCC High team. Thanks, Matt. Please take over.
Yeah, so just quite a few, as you can see here, items on the M365 security side. I did just bold a couple of ones here I did want to just touch on. Starting with Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or Cloud App Security as it was previously known. One of the things that Cloud App Security can now provide is the ability to connect to multi-clouds. In other words, to connect to AWS or AKS or EKS, and integrate that with Azure Security Center, and so along with Azure Purview. And so these things all being integrated together provide a much better kind of plane for understanding the security posture of the multi-cloud environments, and allow you to then to build remediation around that. The next item, which has kind of been highly anticipated, is proper vulnerability management for mobile devices on the Android and iOS platform. So previously, this was something that was available through a third-party app. So if you had a third-party security provider, they would have an app deployed onto a mobile device, and that data could be reported up into the Defender platform. Now this is able to be done with a native enrollment for Android and iOS devices. So there's no longer a need to have that third-party app. And again, this rolls up into the Defender suite as well. I'm going to skip over one here just because it makes sense to talk about a different one, which is the Defender, the Endpoint Manager cross-platform management down at the bottom there. So this is a big one because while we know we've been able to manage, Windows, iOS, and Android, and to a lesser extent macOS devices, Microsoft's now added the basic capabilities of managing Linux desktops. This is a big thing because it brings into realm things like conditional access, device compliance. And while the initial offering is somewhat limited as to what policies and settings it can actually adhere to, it is a big step. And so the Microsoft team is looking to iterate on this pretty quickly to bring up the Linux side up to at least where macOS is, and continue down that path. Jumping back up to the conditional access, or excuse me, the identity governance. So this is something, again, as Jake talked about, that stems from some of the CloudKnox acquisition. And the big thing here is to have extensions in identity governance. So if you've ever used the identity governance framework within Azure Active Directory, we know it's pretty extensible, but it's also not super dynamic. And so having these workflows attached to that, along with extensions, so I can do things like SCIM provisioning, those types of things, will be very helpful for the additional integration of applications into Azure AD, beyond your normal kind of Salesforce and Slack and those kind of things to allow a lot more workflow-based integrations. And then the last item to highlight here is the concept of app governance within Defender for Cloud Apps. This is something that has been asked for quite a bit. It's been in preview for a couple of months, now basically launching here just at the end of the year. And the idea behind this is that while if we think about things like our traditional conditional access policies, right, we can look at knowns as we evaluate a sign-in session, right? What app governance is really focused on is that continuous evaluation, and we'll see that here in a second mentioned as well as looking at parts of the session. So, right, is the user transiting networks? Are they attempting to access data they maybe shouldn't be? Are they changing things about their account as their session is happening? And so just like anything in cloud app security, right, we have policy. We can take that policy and then provide protection. We can do alerting. We can terminate sessions, all those types of things. This has been something that I've deployed in some labs and seen some really great things happening. Transitioning VPNs and bringing up sessions in different browsers or old browsers, that kind of thing, and the ability for it to almost in real time act on those changes is pretty impressive. Next slide, please.
Matt, I was just going to say, and if you missed the last update last Thursday that I gave on Power Platform apps, that's something that's coming to Power Platform Canvas apps, is to be able to set conditional access on those apps. So that's huge, and that's coming, I think, in spring of next year. So we'll app governance is such a big topic moving forward, especially with conditional access and other protections on them. Go ahead, Matt.
Yep. So those who have ever been on a talk with me or even on calls, we're talking about deployment of M365 knows I have a pretty intense passion for identity and have for quite a long time. And so just wanted to highlight a couple of things identity related. These somewhat overlap with some of the things we've talked about so far, things like conditional access authentication context. This is very integrated with what I talked about for Defender for Cloud Apps. And again, those additional capabilities there and the rename happening. There's also a much richer experience for alerting and incidents as well, flowing between, for example, Defender for Cloud Apps, Sentinel, and the other Defender products as well. This is a big one, which is Microsoft has pushed passwordless authentication for round about almost probably 3 years now, and has made some really great strides. I, for one, am happy to be passwordless in my corporate and my personal tenants because I think it makes a lot of sense. It's actually a lot easier. But one thing you have to think about is how you onboard users. And so that's where temporary access passes come into play. So TAPs basically are the ability for you to force users into being passwordless from day one. And so a temporary access pass can be generated. Think of it almost like if you've ever used an app password, although they expire after X amount of time, that could be triggered based on what the administrator wants. But the great thing about this is a user can literally, have their machine shipped to them, sign in for the first time, and then they're going to be, prompted to enroll in Windows Hello for Business. They're going to download the Authenticator app. They're going to do all the things that really build the fence around around passwordless authentication. So it's been a great addition to the passwordless ecosystem. One highlight of Azure App Proxy, if you're not using this and you have on-premises applications, Azure App Proxy is a really great tool for allowing users to kind of get off the traditional idea of VPN. And so App Proxy can actually function in that sense. And while App Proxy has been around for years, there was always some limitations. And so one of the big things that's been really improved is header-based authentication. This is for things like Java-based apps that don't support SAML. Even there's the ability to use it with some LDAP apps. And so there's really some great things that can be going on here for getting some of those legacy applications that even if they were lifted and shifted to Azure, they still have legacy authentication. And so that new header-based authentication is great. As you can see there too, some new geo-routing capabilities for the app proxy service. The second to last bullet there, AWS single sign-on. This is one that you would have thought had been around for a long time, and it was in a certain degree, but it wasn't as extensible into the Amazon identity access model. Now that Microsoft has worked really closely with AWS to get that all sussed out, you can have SSO with Azure AD, along with all the things that go along with it, right? So conditional access. We'll talk about some additional items in a second. So that's a big one. If you're an AWS shop as well as an Azure AD shop, you can get those integrated and again, take advantage of all those functions of AWS. And then lastly, just some improvements to Azure AD external identities as well, as it relates to workflows and some of the other things we've talked about so far.
And as we're going through these things, if you guys are excited about these things, you think they're good, you love them, whatever, give us some reaction with your emoticons. Feel free to use those at any time. You're not interrupting anything. We'd love to see your feedback about which items that you're most excited about. So definitely use those items.
Just a couple more details on some identity items as well. As I mentioned, there's some enhancements around a lot of the existing products, and as well as some items that we're going to see that kind of are tertiary as well. So identity protection has been something that's been around for quite a few years. Of course, there's two different aspects to this, right? There's the on-premises component, which requires an agent, although that can provide some really great information and allow you to kind of better build a graph and look at things like lateral movement and honeypot tokens and those kind of things. And then there's also the cloud version of this, right? So there's still identity protection that needs to be done within Azure AD. So we can see some additional items that are in there as well. Then looking at conditional access filters for devices, this is a great one because previously, if you wanted to define a access policy, you could not base it on a specific filter of devices. It had to be a group. Now you can actually use device filters in real time, so you can look at things like model or types of devices or patch level, those kind of things. Two items that are in preview here, which are a much revised conditional access experience, which includes templates as well as a brand new dashboard. You can actually dashboard and much more easily play out and model what your conditional access policies are going to look like. You can also see a lot more statistics on those conditional access policies. So things like when were they triggered, when were they not triggered, when did users get interrupted in their authentication flow, all those kind of things. And then we see two more here. CAE has actually been in preview for about 3 months. It's launching hopefully in January as GA. And CAE is this idea of, again, continuously evaluating what the user's doing, right? So again, this kind of goes with things like session risk, and it's kind of adding all of these things together to provide a CAE score, as I would call it. So again, did it in the middle of a session, a user change their password or attempt to change their password from a different machine than they were using, or was there just odd activity that was happening during the session? And then lastly, there's also going to be conditional access filters for applications. And so again, we can use properties of the applications, like whether it's an OAuth application or whether it's an enterprise app, those types of things to provide some additional filtering and conditional access policies there.
That's great, Matt. We appreciate you giving us these highlights. Again, if you have interest in any of these, please send us an email or reach out to your cloud strategist or account rep, and we'll be happy to talk and follow up on any of these topics that Matt just went over. Next up, we've got Scott Derby, another cloud strategist. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the window or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. But we'd love to hear some of your feedback as we go through this. Go ahead, Scott.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ken. And thank you. Perfect. Well, it wouldn't have been an Ignite session for Microsoft if we didn't have another set of name changes. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk through some of the new name changes that have been happening across a lot of the security platform from a Microsoft perspective. So the biggest thing that we're going to talk through here today is that a lot of the tool sets from the security platform that have been focused around threat protection have been renamed under the overall Microsoft Defender brand. So Probably the key things to highlight here, a lot of the tool sets that were in the Azure Security Center and Azure Defender have now been renamed into Defender for Cloud. That does bring in a number of new capabilities, and I think one of the biggest ones that I found probably most exciting is the ability for them to do, or to us to now fully support multi-cloud configurations to be able to assess AWS environments for security best practices, regulatory standards, and more. So obviously that's a big one there. Microsoft Sentinel has been rebranded, or Azure Sentinel, excuse me, has been rebranded from Microsoft Sentinel. Couple of new capabilities that have been brought into there. So there's the ability to have over 100 different solution sets that are integrated now into that. Some new connectors have been brought into that, including connectors to be able to do analysis against Azure storage environments, Azure SQL, Kubernetes environments, as well as Key Vault. And all this has been then brought into this overall new name of Microsoft Sentinel, which will become kind of the overarching pane of glass from a management perspective in the overall platform. So with that, next slide for me, Ken. To kind of step you through some of the overall product name changes that have occurred here. Microsoft Threat Protection, the overall brand has been renamed into Microsoft 365 Defender. This is an older name change, but still absolutely part of the overall theme. The Microsoft Defender for Advanced Threat Protection, which really is focused around providing protection around the endpoints, Windows, iOS, Android-based devices, has been renamed and brought under the brand of Defender for Endpoint. The Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, which provides a lot of the anti-phishing, malware types of protection sets that have been brought under the Microsoft Defender for Office naming. Azure Advanced Threat Protection, which is focused around doing identity protection, scanning for things like brute force password attacks or lateral movements, has now been brought under the naming of Microsoft Defender for Identity. And the Microsoft Cloud App Security Toolset has been now brought under the naming of Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the Azure Security Center, Azure Defender have been brought under the naming of Defender for Cloud. Azure Defender for IoT is now Microsoft Defender for IoT, and Azure Sentinel is Microsoft Sentinel. If you could show the next slide for me, Ken. What I wanted to do here was just kind of give you a picture of how all of the pieces are going to fit together into the overall stack. From a single pane of glass, from a SIEM perspective, Microsoft Sentinel will continue to be kind of that management console where we'll be able to surface all incidents, notifications. Obviously, this brings in a multi-cloud scenario now, being able to connect a number of different third-party connectors into here. So being able to really give us a good view of everything that's going on across Azure, AWS, and other cloud solutions. And then Microsoft 365 Defender, which is focused at primarily protecting a lot of our collaboration environments, been rolled up into that. So this would include Defender for Office 365, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Identities, and Defender for Endpoints, which is typically part of your Microsoft 365 subscriptions or your E5 subscriptions. And then a lot of the tool sets that are designed to be able to protect from the cloud infrastructure aspects have been then brought up under the Defender for Cloud architecture. So being able to give us the workloads to protect SQL environments, our VMs in the cloud, containers, network traffic, IoT, and apps is now brought into that Defender for Cloud and architecture set. So all this then surfaced under the overall Microsoft Sentinel. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of some of the changes that Microsoft has brought in for around the naming and integration sets and new capabilities into the overall threat protection platform. So.
All right, thanks, Scott Derby. I appreciate that. So basically, they put Microsoft Defender in front of everything, right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Yeah. All right. So I wish I had the thumbs down or one of the 800 new emoticons that are coming, because I would have definitely used it right there. Next up, we've got Shane here, our endpoint architect, going over some of the updates to endpoints in Office 365 and Azure. Go ahead, Shane.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. I divided up these into three sections, but regarding endpoint management and security, First one, Azure Virtual Desktop. If you're not familiar with Azure Virtual Desktop yet, that is basically Microsoft's VDI as a service. It's a cloud offering, and they handle all of the backend components for you. And they announced in this last Ignite support for Azure Stack HCI. Now, Azure Stack HCI is fairly new as well. Basically, Azure Stack HCI is designed for customers who, for data sovereignty reasons or high I/O requirements or whatever the reason might be, they need to keep some workloads on-prem, but they still want to take advantage of cloud computing. It extends Azure services into your own data centers. So now, with AVD giving support to Azure Stack HCI, you can do a similar thing there, where you can use AVD to with Windows 10, Windows 11 desktops and applications from your own data centers. So that's a great new capability. Also with AVD, they announced a UI for configuring auto scaling. Up till now, we've always had to use Azure Logic apps to configure the auto scaling capabilities, which is really important for AVD to be able to scale up and down your environment and turn off VMs when you're not using them to save on costs. So pretty important stuff. Before, with the auto scaling, you had to use some kind of partner solution. So now it's just baked right into Microsoft's solution. Around Microsoft Endpoint Manager, so new capability is scheduling around Windows feature updates. And Windows feature updates is basically OS version updates. So going from version 20H1 to 20H2 or 21H1, before you could push these out, but you didn't have any control over the scheduling when it happened, and so the scheduling was introduced. Matt already talked about the Linux desktop management, but I do want to talk about from the perspective of one of the big things they announced for around Microsoft Defender, around Intune management of devices, was being able to manage devices through Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So one of the weaknesses of Intune is that it's always been very desktop focused. So there's no server management, for example. So with Intune you can manage Windows 10 and Windows 11, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. And so now they're introducing these additional capabilities around Linux, but also around servers. So you can do like a basic level of security policy management through Intune and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, so that even if the device is not enrolled in Intune, so say it's like a Windows server, it's not enrolled in Intune, if it is enrolled in, if it is onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, then you can do basic security policy management through that. So that's a great thing, because a lot of organizations are looking at what's my strategy going to be for migrating away from on-prem tools like Configuration Manager to just doing pure endpoint cloud management. And one of the things that keeps people back is the server management piece, because Intune doesn't do that yet. So any steps they make in that direction is a good thing. It's gonna move us more towards that cloud-only management model that we could use. So other things around Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, they introduced Microsoft Defender for Business. That's for small organizations, but basically it's like a Microsoft Defender for Endpoint light version designed for SMB customers. And they also introduced MDE Plan 1, or Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 1. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is an E5 level, or G5, A5. It's an E5 level offering that for the full Microsoft Defender for Endpoint suite of products that you get, including the endpoint detection and response, or EDR component of it, the automated investigation or remediation. All those tools are kind of all go together. MDE Plan 1 basically gives you everything except the EDR component and the threat and vulnerability management component of that. And the automated investigation remediation. So those components are out. But what you do get is you get the next generation protection. You get the you get the attack surface reduction. Products are all included in that, and you get the integration of those solutions into the MDE portal, which is kind of the key part, because some of those technologies just come with your your Windows operating system, you know. And you can manage them through Intune and things like that. But it ties it all together and allows additional functionality, especially when you look at more platforms than just Windows, because MDE manages a wide variety of platforms. And then finally, Matt had this on his slide, but they introduced the vulnerability management for Android and iOS devices. Formerly, that was only available for Windows, Linux, and Mac. So yeah, they're expanding the number of platforms you can manage in all of these areas around endpoints. So that's a good thing. I cede my time. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Shane. We're running a little bit long, so we're going to move on to the next. I really appreciate that, Shane. Lots of great updates there. And if you haven't seen, 2 months ago, I think it was, You Already Own It, securing the endpoint. Shane did an awesome job on that. There's also a blog by George Scott. So definitely check out the recording if you need it. If you need the recording or access to the blog, please let us know. We'll get you access to that. But Shane did a great job, and so did George on that topic about 2 months ago. So definitely check that out. Next up, we got a poll, and we're going to launch the poll, but then go right into the next section on Azure, which hopefully we can cut down a little bit. But if you can go ahead and launch the poll, Casey, and we'll come back to the poll results at the very end if we have time. I'd appreciate it. But we're asking, are you currently using or evaluating some of the Defender products, specifically Defender for Cloud Apps, which was in the past, it was MCAS, right? Or the Defender for Endpoint products? Are you launching both? Are you interested in them? Maybe you're not looking at them now, but maybe for next year. So we're just kind of curious what people are doing. Looks like we've got a couple answers already, so that's great. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Scott Dowling, another one of our cloud strategists. Scott, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Ken. I'll get through this fairly quickly here. There's a lot of updates around Azure and specifically around the networks. I just want to highlight a few that were of interest to me, but certainly check out all of the news that came out from Microsoft, as there is quite a bit. First thing I want to talk about is the Azure Gateway Load Balancer, right? This is a service within Azure that ensures that traffic to your application endpoints is first sent to a filter, right, to inspect packets, etc. Via network virtual appliance. There's two important updates here. IPs can be added to pools, not just the virtual machine NICs, and the load balancer now supports containers and scale sets. It's also important to note that the Gateway Load Balancer is currently in preview, which means it's free to play around with and try. So it's always a great time to take advantage of that and see if it's something that would be of use to you and your organization. Within the Azure firewall, there's two kind of important updates that popped out to me. It expanded to include NetGen firewall, and it also has enhanced troubleshooting for your Azure firewall, as well as your VPN gateway inside of Network Insights. And this includes new resource topology views and some pre-built monitoring workbooks. This is all generally available, so it's out there and it's live and working. So feel free to check that out. Within ExpressRoute, there's two important updates. It includes now IPv6 support for private peering. This is going to enable, the Microsoft Azure customers to expand into mobile and IoT markets, as well as to address your IPv4 exhaustion in your on-premise networks today. I think that probably the most exciting update around the network topology within Azure is within ExpressRoute, is something called FastPath. ExpressRoute's virtual network gateways specifically designed to exchange network routes and route network traffic. FastPath is designed to improve that data path performance between your on-premise network and your virtual network within inside of Azure. When it's enabled, FastPath is going to send your network traffic directly to virtual machines in the virtual network, bypassing the gateway. I think that's of extreme value to those organizations, especially that are a little bit farther out into the country sometimes when connecting to the cloud. So definitely take a look at that. If you've had performance problems in the past, I think that will be pretty exciting. And then real quick, Bastion Gateway has been increased the support to 500 concurrent sessions. Ken, next one. Azure Migrate is the, is that the next slide, Ken? Yep, okay, yep. Sorry, one slide ahead. So in terms of the infrastructure updates, these are all very, very simple right here on the slide in terms of the extended support capabilities within Windows Server 2008. which is coming to an end on January 10th of 2023. Microsoft does give organizations the ability to purchase an additional year of support. It is costly. I think it's kind of a no-brainer to put that investment into your migrations and get up to speed. Same thing with SQL Server 2008 as well. 2008 R2. Its 3-year extended support is coming to an end July 12th, 2022. So that's an important date for a lot of organizations. And you can see the extended supports there for both Windows Server 2012 as well as SQL Server 2012. Next slide. Here we go. All right. In terms of Azure Migrate, right, this is the central hub of Azure Cloud Migration services and tools. It's offering 3 new capabilities here that are all now in preview. These capabilities allow you to discover and assess your SQL servers in your on-premise environment, as well as other databases for a migration report to Azure from within the Azure Migrate portal itself. The hub itself also now includes an app containerization tool that supports ASP.NET as well as Java web applications that will assist you in your planning of migrating those applications to containers running on Azure Kubernetes. Also, in regards to the Azure Migrate, the new Azure PowerShell module adds support for server migration tools, agentless methods of migrating VMware virtual machines to Azure. Within Azure Auto Manage, I know a lot of customers that I speak to haven't even really kind of played around with Auto Manage at all, but there is a really big update here in terms of being able to enable bootless security patching for your Windows Server virtual machines inside of the IaaS portion of Azure. This enhancement allows for the deployment of security patches in literally seconds without bringing the virtual machine down, which helps you and your organization protect those servers against critical threats. As we know, we have to respond to those rather quickly. With the Azure Backup Center, it's now generally available, and it includes support that's in preview for Azure Disks, Blobs, and Azure Databases for servers. You see Windows Server 2022 is now available in preview as well. Feel free to boot one of those up inside of Azure and play around with it and take a look at the new features and functionalities. And I think a really important update here around Azure Storage too, in terms of having auto rotations of the keys, right? You used to have to manually, as you refreshed or recreated a new key, have to manually change where those references are. And you're now able to kind of auto rotate those wherever they're named and required to be updated. So that definitely makes life a little bit easier for organizations and leveraging Azure Storage.
All right. Great updates, Scott. Those are awesome. Not sure which one I like the best. But up next, we've got Miguel Wood, and I want to make sure Miguel's got enough time. So, Miguel, I hate to do this to you, but we're running a little bit long. So, see what you can do on giving your updates. Miguel?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken. So really quick, these are the primary Azure Data Service or ADS updates that Ignite 2021 had. There's one additional update that I'm going to have that was just prior to Ignite 2021. But to go ahead and jump to the next slide. The one thing I want to make sure is you understand what Microsoft is doing to the Azure Data Services. They're basically putting them into 3 columns or 3 buckets. You've got the database systems, analytics and AI, and governance. And all 3 of those are actually considered Azure Data Services. The big thing I want to concentrate on is that second bucket. You're seeing, just like some of the other rebranding or consolidation of brand around analytics and AI is going to fall under primarily around the Synapse Analytics. Enterprise Power BI is still there, as well as the AI and machine learning there as well. So if you jump to the next one of the things that we've actually dealt with is all these different data services PaaS pieces that customers are actually had been using individually to bring up all their data, their big data into Azure and into analytics. Go ahead and move forward on this. And what you'll see is that all of those pieces have really come into a unified analytics platform under Azure Synapse Analytics. And this can be your data warehousing, your pipelines, which would have been basically ADF before. All those pieces are now basically the entry point or one consolidation of everything around analytics and AI. Go ahead and move forward. This is the Azure Synapse Analytics. And I'm doing this so I can actually talk to the points and the updates that we actually had in Ignite. So all of these things especially fall under and utilize the Azure Synapse capabilities. Again, something that you'd want to be looking at if you're dealing with definitely consolidation of data. If you move on to the final slide, Ken, the updates are fairly straightforward that I thought were the most important. Cosmos DB, if you're not familiar with that, there's been some significant enhancements around for developers to actually control cost as well as customizable provisioning around spending limits and cost limits with Azure Advisor. There is also a new managed instance for Apache Cassandra, which would be basically kind of that mapping, if you will, for Cosmos DB. Around Azure Synapse Analytics, one of the things that we see is not only a set of new templates for these data warehouses and database templates around specific industries. And if you paid attention to the first You Already Own It Ignite recap, you saw this also happening in the Microsoft 365 space as well. So you got these database templates, as well as now we actually have the Azure Synapse Data Explorer provides the ability to get into some real-time analytics for telemetry and time series, and especially log data. So that's been brought in as well. And then finally, Event Hubs Premium is now generally available and hit GA for, and that's kind of a linked service with Azure Synapse. Again, as you see all these things kind of pop in. Moving on to Azure Database, we do have a flexible server deployment that's new for both MySQL and PostgreSQL that they announced, and it actually has gone GA since Ignite on both of those. On the Azure SQL performance, Link, which is, think of that as almost a fast pipeline or direct connection into Azure Synapse, and also allowing that ability to go ahead and also link hybrid flexibility between SQL on-prem as well as Azure SQL managed instance workloads. And so it actually can also be offloaded for read-only scenarios. One big thing here, and I want to call this out, I bolded it here, is next-gen hardware. One of the challenges we've had with SQL MI to this point has been the storage limitations. Well, now with the new next-gen hardware, we actually do have in the general purpose service tier up to 16 terabytes of data, I should say, in both general purpose and business critical service tiers of storage because it's able to access more memory per vCore. One thing again, SQL Server 2022, I do want to recall what was mentioned. SQL Server 2008, 2002, and SQL Server 2012 will end support in July. At 6.5 months for us to start thinking about that. You can get and buy for 2008, 2002, one more additional year for those security updates, but again at a cost. Whereas the 2012 SQL Server, you will be able to, if you migrate those to Azure, you will get the 3 years of security updates. And finally, although not announced at Ignite, there was a lot of information around it at Ignite, is Azure Purview, which is the enterprise unified data governance platform that connects to AWS, all multi-cloud SaaS applications, as well as on-prem, and allows you to get a full enterprise data governance platform visible in a single pane of glass for users, security administrators, and your data managers. And that's pretty much it. I hope that was quick enough, Ken.
Oh, Miguel, that was really awesome. And again, if you're in one of those categories where maintenance is coming up, think about moving those servers to Azure and get those maintenance extended for another 3 years. All right, next up we've got Josh Day, who's going to talk. He's one of our he's the practice manager for development, and he's going to talk to us about development updates here at Ignite. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, sure. So while this was not build, we did have some really good announcements during Ignite around some of the tools that developers can use to assist in our application development, as well as some new features that were released for Azure resources as well. Starting with the Azure Communication Service SMS shortcode preview and the Microsoft Teams interoperability general availability. What a SMS shortcode is, it's a 5 or 6 digit character that allows businesses to send more text messages in a shorter time period to their customers. And you can move on to the next slide if you don't mind. And Azure Communication Services will preview shortcodes for its SMS offering later this month. With Azure Communication Services, developers can integrate SMS-based engagement and workflows into their business or consumer apps to enable and improve on-the-go interactions with seamless connections. Okay, go on to the next slide. The Azure Container Apps is now in preview. Azure Container Apps, a fully managed serverless containers service which is built for microservices that scales dynamically based on HTTP traffic, events, or long-running background jobs, is now in preview. You can get the flexibility you need with the serverless container. Oh, you're too quick on the gun there. You can get the flexibility you need with serverless container service built for microservice applications and robust auto-scaling capabilities with the overhead of managing complex infrastructure. You can run containers and scale response to HTTP traffic or growing list of KEDA-supported scale triggers. Go ahead, next slide. So the Azure Logic App updates. Customers can now run Logic apps in a fully disconnected fashion on Azure Arc. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. To leverage existing SQL investment for more predictable billing with SQL as a storage provider for Logic apps runtime. This will help customers to run Logic apps fully disconnected without Azure storage dependencies. This is huge because you can imagine being in a completely different cloud and being able to use Logic apps within it. So it's completely disconnected, and you can use this in AWS, Google Cloud, or any of the other cloud platforms. All right, go on the next slide. Updates and enhancements to Azure DevOps. DevOps workflow generation tool, or the generator tool. Now, I've had a chance to tinker with this a little bit. You can basically build out your entire process that you're going through as far as with design, and build a really clean template to provide customers or to show exactly what it looks like, what your application development process looks like from end to end. It's a DevOps tool chain that is a collection of tools to help with planning, designing, developing, testing, securing, delivering, and maintaining software applications according to agile principles. This tool chain allows development and operations teams to collaborate throughout the entire software product lifecycle. Okay, you can go to the next one. Now, I was talking about this earlier, the new Azure Arc releases. Azure Arc offers simplified management, fast app development, and consistent Azure services, easily organized, govern, and secure Windows and Linux servers, SQL servers, Kubernetes clusters across data centers, the edge, and multi-cloud environments in Azure. So this Azure Arc, and I've read up on this substantially. The Azure Arc enables, the ability to communicate with different cloud platforms as well as on-premise. So you can, any of the Azure services that you, and we kind of talked about this in some of the previous slides, is you can roll up some of the services that you have on an on-premise environment and read them or see them inside of Azure. And Azure Arc is behind that. Next slide.
I think that's it. So
that is it.
For going for making your time there. Thanks, Josh. We really appreciate that. And if you have any questions about development, please shoot them our way, and we'll be happy to get you some answers. I know we're running long. We're gonna launch this poll again on the theme of Microsoft Ignite and cyber resiliency, right? With the recent AWS outages and exploited vulnerabilities, how is your organization planned for resiliency? And obviously, you see the technical and the operational results here on the screen here. We're kind of interested in, the poll answers about the technical. What are you doing? Are you using multiple clouds, multiple regions within a cloud, Azure Site Recovery, those kind of things? So if you can go ahead and answer that, we would love to see the results on that. And then we have just enough time to have our roundtable discussion and our last discussion on some new licensing that's coming, some new licensing information that Scott Derby is going to talk about, and we're all going to chime in about some thoughts about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. So it wouldn't be complete without a little bit of a licensing update. So a number of these were announced back actually in August from Microsoft, but because of kind of the impending timeline where they'll go in effect on March 1st, we wanted to make sure that we got them out in front of you guys again. So Microsoft has announced a fairly large price increase, which I know is probably bad news for all of us, but we think it's probably important to kind of talk through and make sure that people understand some of the implications that go into that one. So really effectively March 1st, they will be raising the prices on primarily Office 365 E1, E3, and E5 suites. Roughly on the E1, about a 25% price increase, 15% on the E3, and about 9% on the Office 365 E5. And again, I want to stress that those are the Office 365 suites that are impacted there. Probably the largest from a percentage of users that have this particular suite and probably will get the biggest impact is there's about a 12.5% price increase coming to Office or to Microsoft 365 E3. So they're definitely kind of narrowing the gap between the cost differential of E3 and E5 within this move here. One of the things to highlight here is that Microsoft 365 E5 and frontline SKUs, both the F1 and the F3, are not affected at this point. So definitely, obviously, still a lot of value on the E5 side from the security collaboration capabilities that are built into that one. And then the frontline SKUs obviously are not affected. So just kind of a couple of things to keep in mind. There is a link that we will send out, and I saw Miguel just drop that into the chat for everyone that does announce some of the details around that one. A lot of their justification around the increase, especially on the Microsoft 365 E3, is that there's been a number of new investments that Microsoft has made into these particular SKUs that are bringing a lot more value into them. And so they felt like it was time to kind of bring a price increase in line with that. So just kind of a couple things that they've done with that and some of the announcements that went along with that. Audio conferencing that was part of Office 365 E5 and part of M365 E5 has now been included into E3. That alone is a fairly expensive SKU standalone, so that by itself can actually justify some cost savings in that side of it. So as you guys are looking at some of these, just know if you're already in a current agreement, you are grandfathered in. Those prices will not be affected. It's any new agreements starting March 1st. So
Till your next DA, right?
To your next DA, exactly.
So I think one thing that's clear, and please join in other folks on the call, but and if we have any questions from the audience, please ask some questions. But it's obviously, the E1 SKU is kind of gone past its time, and I think they're trying to like squeeze people into those F SKUs now, the F3 and so forth. So I think that's really why you're seeing. I think that's the thought behind the bigger increase on the E1. Most people need those security capabilities that are in E1, and they need more than just browser-based. And the F SKUs have so much more value baked into them. Even M365 F3 is like from a cost standpoint, is better than E1 now. So, it makes sense that they're pushing you more towards the F SKUs. Any other thoughts?
No, I think you hit it spot on, Ken. I mean, I think as I look at it, from a cost and value point, the F SKU is really the best way to go if you're kind of looking at that, lower tier user set. So.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, I think it's huge. I can't believe it hasn't been talked about more, but I know we paid, over $43, $45 a person per year for that PSTN dial-in conferencing, which everybody wanted, right? But we gave it out to select people. But even if you still have, that's a huge expense now. If you think about now, everybody getting that capability, and no one has to worry about not being able to have a dial-in phone number for a conference anymore. That's huge. So I think that alone, like you said, is a huge part of the value of the increase. And it's not just Microsoft, right? I think you mentioned when we were talking about this that Google is also raising their prices as well.
Yeah, it is something they are seeing industry-wide. I mean, Google went through a fairly significant price increase on some of their offerings. And unfortunately, in those particular cases, they did not grandfather in existing customer agreements, and it kind of made a broad sweeping impact across a lot of their user base. So this is not alone to just Microsoft. We're kind of seeing it across the board.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And thanks, team. And thanks to all the architects and folks that helped put this together today. We want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we still have about another minute or two. We're happy to stay a little bit long as well. So if you have some questions, raise your hand, put a question in the chat window. I'm happy to have some questions about this. I know we had one question that came in over the registration, which we will get back to you specifically. So don't worry about it. We will definitely get to your answer there. By all means, when you're registering, we're always asking that question. What do you want to know about? What thoughts do you have and what questions that you have about this topic we're talking about? Please send them in so we can build them into the presentations and get to the answers you're looking for. Is G3 and G5 licensing costs going up too? I'll let you handle it.
Yeah, so government, community cloud, and GCC high pricing is affected. Those will go up. Education, nonprofit is not.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. Great question, though. Any other questions? Again, thanks, team, for giving us these updates and your thoughts from Ignite. We want to thank you for your time today. We know it's valuable, and we appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. Just a reminder, if there's a topic that you want to discuss in a future You Already Own It, please send us an email at youalreadyownit@go-planet.com or contact your cloud strategist or account rep. Thanks for joining us today. And again, we here at Planet, we want to wish you all a wonderful holiday season and a happy and safe new year. Thanks for joining us.